Now, for me, one of my favorite finished bourbons is the Wild Turkey 15-year export.
Okay.
Finished in my belly.
I was waiting for that. Like, do you know something I don't know?
What's going on here? And welcome everyone to episode 242 of The Mashup, the best bourbon conversation you are near all week long. We're your hosts, Kenny, Steven, and Anthony. Hello, gentlemen.
What's up? What's up?
Howdy.
What's going on, fellas? I heard Mr. Howdy in there. Who's that? Who's that?
I jumped in. Was that premature?
No, I like the fact that you jumped in.
All
But,
right.
ladies and gentlemen, we have a really special conversation for you tonight. This is actually
We have a special guest and just another guy.
another guy and a special guest. So let's start with the other guy first. The other guy back again with us is Jason Hale, who's the co-host, co-founder of the YouTube podcast series Arsenic Culture. Jason, good friend of ours, buddy. We're happy to have you back.
Thanks for having me, fellas.
Yeah, we appreciate it, and we know you're a turkey head, and that you're looking forward to talking with the guests that we have tonight
Excited
as
to
well.
meet
too.
our guest.
Exactly. So, last but not least, certainly a person I haven't met, but I've had the privilege of editing content for, Mr. David Jennings, aka Rare Bird 101, back with us again. Award-winning author, can I call you that?
Oh, if you want to.
Okay, award-winning author. The unofficial or official mayor of Wild Turkey, and then also the proprietor of some really up-and-coming brands, Raconteur Rye. That collaboration is amazing. I love tasting the whiskey. And you're here with us tonight to talk about your brand new pursuit, which is Washington Lafayette Revolutionary Spirits, and some releases that you have upcoming. So, David, welcome back, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all having me on. I always love doing this. This is the best podcast in bourbon.
Oh, wow.
You guys,
hey, wait a minute.
It's just real. It's just real. You know, you guys have a real show, and I appreciate that. I feel like, fans appreciate the real, and this is as real as a bourbon podcast gets. So thank you for having me on. Thank you.
We appreciate that so much. And this may be my first time I meet you. I'm done now. That's good. We can cut it out.
You guys are awesome. Thank you.
Oh man. No, that's great. So I mentioned that we're going to be highlighting your new venture here in the whiskey and your two inaugural releases. This show is going to come out on the 1st. So it's a Tuesday. The release of these products that we're going to talk about tonight is actually on the 4th, right?
That's right. Correct? So this podcast is on April Fool's Day. Great.
April Fool's Day. See,
will it come out? Will it not come out?
It may not. That's it. That's a good joke here. So both these releases we're going to talk about tonight are coming out exclusively through Bourbon Outfitters.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay. And I'm just excited to be here, so I don't really know how else to say it, but I just kind of want to get into it, but also kind of want to know what you've been up to and how you've been. So what's new in the world of David Jennings? You did 2 quick back-to-back episodes with us, and then I wasn't on either of them. So it's kind of like a weird thing right now where I'm like, I want to ask you a bunch of stuff, but these guys already asked it.
Well, the funny thing is the last few months have been insane for me. We had a hurricane in South Carolina.
Right.
Y'all are probably familiar with that.
Right.
I never expected it to come into my area. Hurricanes are typically a coastal thing, but Helene decided to kind of venture into my neck of the woods and destroyed a lot of property and had to deal with that. That was not fun. Actually just finally wrapped up all of my claims just a couple weeks ago.
Goodness gracious.
And then, after that, I ended up having the flu. And then after that, I had the shingles, which...
What?
Yes. If you're at the age where you can get your shingles vaccination, I'm not a big vaccine pusher, but after having it, I would say go get that because that was miserable. I hated that. That was the worst. And then we decided, hey, let's sell our house and buy another house. So the funny thing is, I'll leave Kentucky on Wednesday. I'm going to do a Four Roses pick. I'm going to get on a plane, fly home, go to bed, wake up, and the moving truck's going to be there literally on Thursday morning. So, this is I have been through the ringer the past couple months here. All the while, just trying to keep track of all my normal bourbon stuff, with my blog and Patreon and all that. And admittedly, it's been hard to kind of have the content creation that I normally have. My flow has been kind of knocked down a little bit, but that's okay. But I am excited to talk to you guys tonight about Caleb's Crossing, which is the first set of expressions from Washington Lafayette, and kind of our main line there, and the story about that. But it's been a crazy couple months, and I'm glad to finally, hopefully, be settling down. I can't wait to move and then maybe get back to some normalcy. But thank you guys for having me on, and I appreciate that.
We appreciate you, man.
Oh, thank you.
We have a very exciting day coming up tomorrow, thanks to you.
Yeah, man. We're going to go picking some barrels. It's going to be awesome.
We are recording this on the 24th. It won't be dropped till April 1st. But tomorrow we get to go to Wild Turkey.
That's true.
Thanks to David Jennings.
Yep. We got a big special. Can't say too much about it, but we got some special stuff
by the time
going
this thing
on.
drops, it'll already be done.
Oh, that's true. So we got the big 1018 release tomorrow.
8-year age stated, United States, 8-year age stated.
Finally, about damn time. It hasn't happened since 1992 was the last time we had an age.
Wow.
Well, technically, last year Jimmy's 70th was the 101, but that was kind of a one-off. This is going to be more of a regular type of release,
shelf stable.
So very excited about that, and I feel like it's about time too, because with the market kind of taking, and I'm not one of those people that are like, bourbon's dying, the bourbon boom's over, all that kind of stuff. I'm not one of those people. The market has taken a downturn, but I think that's because we're back to kind of
it's turned back to 2019, 2020,
right?
Before the COVID,
we're still doing better than 2019,
right?
Right. And so the 1018 only makes sense. I mean, Jim Beam's gone up on their age statements, so why not Wild Turkey? So we're back to that classic 1018. I think the non-age stated version will still be around and plentiful. But when you have that 8-year version out on the shelf, I mean, I think most of us are naturally going to reach for that over the non-age stated. Nothing against the non-age stated.
Do you know if it's going to be the same price?
That's what I was going to ask.
I don't know what the price.
How dare you?
I guess we'll find out tomorrow. But my guess is that it won't be any more than Jimmy's 70th. I would imagine it'd be a little bit less than Jimmy's 70th. Is my guess. I mean, you got Russell's 10. It's not 90 proof, but Russell's 10 is like $35-$40 for most people.
Probably 40 here.
I'm reasonably sure that this will be probably 40-ish, maybe 45, depending on the store or the state or whatever.
Okay.
But probably going to be more than worth it to have an 8-year age stated 101. So
be less than that 10-year Eagle Rare.
Yeah.
Creeping up.
Nothing against Eagle Rare. I love Eagle Rare.
I know. I'm just being silly.
But 1018, that's to me. You're kind of getting back to that classic turkey.
For sure.
We've needed that for a long time now, and it's a shame that we've only seen it overseas. So to have that back in the States, it means a lot.
I was going to say, save a little money. You want to buy them overseas anymore. So.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
There you go.
Exciting release.
Yeah, no doubt. So we're excited about the Wild Turkey thing, of course, but you mentioned Caleb's Crossing.
Yep.
We're excited about that too, and I kind of want you to get into a little bit of how this came to be.
Okay.
Because I visited the website. I mean, the other guys did as well, and we looked at all the information that's on there. But I mean, in David Jennings' own words, right? What do you think? I mean, tell us about the history and the evolution of this. How did this come to be? Because it's really exciting, but also kind of like, when you see a label like this in a brand that you never heard of, people want to know about that. What led to it?
So this all goes back to my dad. My first job really was working for my dad. He had an insurance agency, and that was kind of where I cut my teeth. And then I did go off and work at some other jobs, and then I came back and really got serious around 96 and started working full-time. And eventually he sold his business to a bank, and I stayed on board. Okay. So I spent 24 years of my life working either for my dad's business or for that business that was sold to a bank.
Gotcha.
And I missed working with him because I thought we worked well together, and he's always got great ideas. And
I worked with my dad too, but in a different capacity. Like, he just yelled at me all the time.
You just hold the flashlight.
Go get that tool. Make no mistake, he's the boss. But we got along real well, and he always had great ideas. And he came up to me one day, and he was just like, we ought to do like a whiskey thing together. And the only thing is, he's not really a whiskey guy.
Okay.
He's into wine and he's into brandy, specifically French wine and French brandy. I mean, he loves Italian wine and American wine, but
Nice.
he's really big into French wine and brandy. And he and my stepmom, they travel a lot. They'll go to France usually once a year.
Okay.
And you know what? We were talking about ideas, and he was like, maybe we could buy some Armagnac or something. And I'm like, that's awesome. I love Armagnac, but good luck trying to find 400 or 500 people to buy bottles. Because I mean, these casks are like the yield is pretty up there,
Right.
And the sad thing is, I mean, if you want to realize, like Armagnac, don't get me wrong, there are some amazing casks out there, like 20, 30, 40 years old.
Right.
But the fact that there are 20, 30, 40-year-old casks out there tells you something that a lot of people aren't in tune with it. They're not appreciative of what it is. The fact that you can find it and it's only a few $100s says something. So, I told him, I said, while that would be awesome and I love it, I just don't really think there's a market for it out there. And he's like, well, why don't we try like maybe blending that with whiskey? And this is before the Hogsworth stuff came out. And I was just like, yeah, but what would we call that? Well, that would be like spirit or something. Like, what is that? It's like, it didn't really have an identity. And, even if it turned out cool, trying to convince people to buy something where it was just like this blended spirit, I don't know, it would be really tough, right? So I started explaining to him about how there's cask finishing where you can take straight whiskeys, whether it's rye or bourbon or wheat or whatever, and you can dump it into a cask that maybe once held wine or brandy or whatever, and then pull some of that influence into it and create your own product. And he liked that idea. And so we this was in late 23, early 24, and we talked to MGP because at the time the market was still fairly healthy at the time in 23. We felt like the best place to go would be to MGP to talk about maybe buying some whiskey, and we were able to procure some barrels from MGP, and then we worked with Speyside Cooperage on getting some finishing casks directly from France. We didn't want anything that maybe had been used up. I mean, there are some barrel brokers on the state side and like fine cognac and Armagnac and these kind of things, but the provenance is kind of questionable and how many times they've been used.
And been used over. Yeah.
Right. You don't really know. So we wanted something that we knew was quality, knew was fresh. So we ended up getting some Pineau de Charentes casks from France as well as some Armagnac casks from France. So they were freshly dumped and sent over just, straight for our purposes. And we took the MGP, which was common. We bought some bourbon, different recipes. We bought some rye, and we bought some wheat, and we put them in Pineau and decided to see kind of how they develop. And then the rye really took on this really unique kind of profile with the Pineau, and the bourbon picked up a lot of the attributes, but it still needed something else. So we moved the bourbon to Armagnac, and so what we end up with our inaugural expressions are the bourbon is what we call a dual cask finish. It's two recipes of bourbon that each went into separate Pineau casks, white and red Pineau, and then once those reach their peak of flavor, we move those to Armagnac casks. And then when those reach their peak of flavor in Armagnac, we blended them together, and that's our dual cask finished bourbon.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, it was a lot of time.
How long did you age them?
So they spent 7 months in finishing casks. All of this was determined by taste. There are and nothing against what anybody else does, but I know that there are a lot of producers that they kind of have like a minimum, like we're going to put in there, we're not even going to taste it for a year. And like I felt like, from the conversations I had with other distillers, they were like, you really need to kind of be on top of this and taste it. Don't just like put it in there and decide on a time and then dump
It can
it.
turn quick sometimes on the finishing
Exactly.
stuff.
So the idea was to try to get the maximum out of the finishing cask without sacrificing the flavor of the base spirit.
Traditional bourbon, right.
It had to taste like bourbon and it had to taste like rye. So that's kind of the approach that we had. We had all kinds of ideas early on about different blends and how we were going to do things, but ultimately all the decisions were made on taste. As a matter of fact, we had labels that we were ready to get approved that didn't get approved because they went a different direction. So we went with how the spirit was performing. And Kenny, you tasted some of the early stuff, some of the stuff that hasn't been bottled yet, that's not even represented here tonight, because they just weren't ready yet. And so it was all based on taste and trying to get it to where everything balanced out, and we had, a nice, like with the dual cask finished bourbon, it was tricky because you want to have that bourbon flavor, but you also want to have the Pineau and the Armagnac. So it's kind of like an equilateral triangle. You want to kind of make sure that they're all represented there and that one doesn't dominate the other. Ideally, you would achieve that by like having straight, Pineau finished, and Armagnac finished separately, and then you blend them to that perfect combination. We didn't have that luxury because we just didn't have that number of barrels. So it was really a lot of pressure on me to make sure that, like, once it left that cask and went to another cask, it was all on me. So if it messed up, that was my mistake. So I really
no pressure.
No pressure. So I spent a lot of time, like, how long is it going to be in American Oak? How long is it going to be in Pineau? How long is it going to be in Armagnac? Did I overdo it, underdo it, whatever? So there was a lot of late nights, a lot of just tasting after tasting after tasting.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah. There's a lot of pressure. Now, that was with the bourbon. With the rye, it was a little bit different because the rye just seemed to work really well right off the bat with Pineau. Like, it just had this, like, whereas bourbon's already sweet, so you put it into Pineau, which is sweet. You're getting sweet on sweet. So I had to employ the Armagnac to give it more of that leather, tanniny kind of oak kind of thing. With the rye, it was, you have spice. This is a 95.5 rye, so it already has enough spice from the beginning. It's Kelvin aged rye, so it's 8 years in Kelvin cooperage. It already had like a lot of character to it. The Pineau just kind of brought out more of the sweeter notes, and I'm like, this is kind of where it needs to be. And then I got it to the point where it was just like right where it needed to be finish-wise on the palate, but it kind of affected the finish a little bit to where it kind of had that finishy finish, if that makes any sense, where you get that kind of wine finish. Now, the good news with Pineau, there's no sulfur used in Pineau. Like, a lot of people assume that, like, wine finishes have, like, a sulfur type of note. Well, there's no sulfur used in Pinot.
That's Kenny's thing over there with this port. He hates that.
I can tell that sulfur.
He always says matchstick. Says that matchstick going on there.
The good news about Pinot de Charentes, is that it's not fermented. So it's grape juice. It's literally unfermented grape juice that's blended with eau de vie cognac and then barrel aged. And there's no sulfur used in the production of Pinot. So you're really getting that kind of like grapey grape kind of note, and then with some barrel age on top of that. What I needed, though, was that extra kick in the finish. And so we accomplished that by moving the rye back to another rye barrel. In this case, it was a freshly dumped Tennessee rye, a Tullahoma rye barrel, which some of y'all might be familiar with, and let it sit there for a couple months to kind of just build that finish back up. That's all it really did. It didn't really so much add flavor. It added a sparkly texture to the finish, and you guys will taste that in a minute.
I'm excited because I only had the earlier.
You had the earlier one. It just went in, and so this is kind of a done thing now. But very, very proud of how these turned out. If you want all the specs, I've been very transparent about it. It's not on the label because we were trying to keep the labels kind of where we could continue their use on. If you put too much information on there, you've got to do another label and all that. Yeah. So we're trying to have a label that we could kind of use on. But if you go to the website, which is WashingtonLafayette.com,
you go to
OurWhiskies.com.
You jerk.
You'll get all the details. Like I've put everything on there as far as like origins and finishing time and all that kind of stuff. So there's no questions about what's in this. I know that there are some producers who like to leave a lot of mystery about what's in their product, and I understand there's some proprietary things that go along with that. But then also there's sometimes when you do that, there's this kind of passing it off to the consumer, like, we're not going to give you any more information than what's on the label. And I feel like sometimes that shortchanges the consumer, and the consumer ends up relying on secondhand information and rumors, like, "Ooh, I heard this was so-and-so, or I heard this was age." I'm like, I didn't want that. I didn't want David told so-and-so it was this, whatever. It's like, I just wanted to be as open and honest as possible.
But you also don't want the label muddied up with just stuff like that. You want a nice, cool, nice-looking label.
Right. Well, for from the start, my dad was like, I want to be transparent. I want to tell people what's in this. But at the same time, you don't want to, like, uber geek out on the label, because you're going to have to uber geek out every time you do something. If you decide to pivot and do something a little bit different, then you've got to address that. And it was more like, let's just keep the label really kind of simple, but then be sure to be very, very, very honest on the web disclosure, as long as as much as we could. I mean, if we run into a situation, and we will have a situation, we bought some barrels that have a really tight NDA on them, so there is some future stuff coming that like we can only say so much, but that's not out of our choice. That's just out of the deal.
So are you planning to do the same finishes in the future, or are you going to try to go different
Yes
routes?
and no.
Okay.
We do have some that we kind of want to route a similar direction, but we have some others that we want to take another direction. So these, were finished in wine and brandy barrels. We have some that we want to just finish in straight up French oak. And so those will have a little bit different of a look to
Like
them.
a French oak.
Yeah, because it appeals to a different crowd. So you have some people that are into finished whiskey. They like brandy finishes or wine finishes or whatever. Some people just don't. So I felt like the French oak finish would be something for more the people that enjoy like a straight whiskey, where they don't really want like a wine or a brandy cask. Although I feel like these are very, very subtle and is very careful with the finishing on these. Some people just don't like that at all. So I feel like, let's try to kind of do something across the spectrum, keep it with that French story. And there is a whole backstory to this I should probably get into. I probably should have led with before I even got into this. But yeah, it is very much a combination of American artistry and French tradition. So
We'll make sure we get you there, by the way.
Okay,
We'll get
okay.
to talking about it. Yeah.
So it sounds like the barrels had an important role to play in this. How did you guys select the ones, especially from overseas?
well,
You have to put
Did
your
you already
trust-
have an idea of what you wanted, or did you just go into it blind? And,
No, we had a good contact who was very tight with Speyside, and we told him exactly what we wanted, and he was like, "I can find that for you." I told him the things I really wanted to make sure of is that I wanted freshly dumped casks that were of high quality. I wanted the cooperage to be of high quality, and I wanted to be freshly dumped and try to get them over as wet as possible, because I didn't want something dried out or that would be problematic. And when the barrels actually landed, the finishing cask, I should say, landed at the bottling house, I actually got a phone call from the bottling house, like, "Where did you get these finishing casks from? These are like the best finishing casks we've ever seen."
How about that?
Like, these are amazing. So they were very, very healthy, looked great, and I think it ended up paying off in the end. But yeah, so we made sure that we got the best that we could get with these. It's strange going into a project like this because you have all kinds of ideas in your head how things are going to turn out. And with Pineau, there's not a lot of whiskeys out there that are finished in Pineau de Charente. So I didn't have a lot to rely on as far as a benchmark. So Starlight's Pineau Rye was, kind of like a big benchmark for me, because that was like the only Pineau finished rye I had
I've not heard of it.
available to
Yeah,
me.
I haven't seen.
There've
much
only
of it.
been a few. They've done some bourbon and they've done some rye and Pinot.
Yeah.
They're very sparse, but they're very highly acclaimed. Like, those are some of the more sought after Starlight
Right.
barrels. So, I had that. But then I also bought some Pinot to kind of just play with blends at home, just to see how is this 95.5 going to taste if I put just Pinot straight in it? Is it going to clash? Is it going to work? Because
Right.
I felt like if they could blend together wine and spirit together and taste good, then it could only taste good as a cask finish. So same thing with Armagnac. I went through different Armagnacs of different ages and tried blending them just to see
Dang.
where would this
That's
go.
a lot- that's a
where
lot of
would
work.
this- It is a lot.
Well, late nights, right?
Where would this go?
Yeah, exactly.
It did it end up exactly like what we ended up with? No, but it gave me an idea of what does and does not work.
Right.
This absolutely does not work together. This does work together. This kind of thing. So the key thing here is that my dad, he told me from the beginning, look, I know there's a lot of finished whiskey out there in the market. He's like, I need this to be special. I need this to be representative of something
Right.
a notch above. And I said, well, there's not really.
I think
when
that's why you
think
had me
about it-
taste it earlier on.
Kenny, he's coming in with that.
But when you think about premiums, when you think about premium spirits, especially premium whiskey,
Right.
even more so premium bourbon, I mean, how many premium bourbons can you name that are finished? Maybe Angel's Envy Cask Strength, maybe? I mean, how many more can you name that are super premium, kind of finished expressions? There's not many.
Yeah, I feel like that's a more recent thing, right?
Yeah.
So you see Parker's went out this year and did
Correct.
a malt finished in cognac casks and things like that. So I feel like premium for finishing is something that the major guys anywhere are coming kind of late to.
Well,
Yeah.
I think some of that is during COVID when all you could find on the wholesale market was like 4 and 5 year whiskey. A lot of these smaller producers, the way that they addressed that was, we'll take some young whiskey and we'll make it taste better by dumping it into a finished cask. And it could be sherry, it could be Armagnac, it could be cognac, it could be a wine, it could be some type of odd brandy, you know. And the whole point was to get it to be more palatable. And I think that finished whiskey got a bad rap because of that. It's like, oh, it's finished, so it instantly must be bad. You know, it must be young, it must be youthful, it must be grainy, it must be something that I don't want anything to do with. When the reality of it is, if you put the time and research into any type of whiskey, you should be able to end up with something quality as long as you're passionate about it and do your research and honest with yourself. Like, does this taste good? You know, or am I just doing this to do it? You know, so that was the big thing with me, was like having to be honest with myself. You know, blind tasting after blind tasting. I had some finished whiskeys that I used for like kind of like my scale of like, what are the finished whiskeys that I value most? Like that like these are like stellar A+ kind of finished whiskeys.
For the finished ones.
For finished whiskeys. And I use those as my guide. I'm not saying that these are on that level. To some people maybe they are, to some people maybe they aren't. But to me it was like, can I at least play in the same ball field, right? Yeah. Some of those were, if I've got to name names, obviously Wild Turkey Revival is the best, in my opinion, the best sherry finished bourbon ever made. Best sherry finished bourbon.
You and Alves both like love that.
Oh, I love it. I mean, that I told Eddie that may be his masterpiece. That may be. I mean, as much as I love 1998, and I think that he curated one of the best things Wild Turkey ever made. Finishing casks are a different thing. I mean, he didn't just take bourbon and dump it into finishing casks. He went to Spain, hand selected the sherry cask that he wanted, brought them back, and then dumped 12 and 15 year bourbon in it. I mean, it wasn't like he went out and dumped some 6 or 7 year in there and was just let's see what happens.
That's
he was
a big
like,
commitment.
I'm going to take some of my best whiskey and put it in this thing and like see what happens. And so that was a big risk, and it paid off in a very big way, in my opinion. Another finished whiskey that's top tier on my list is the original Chateau de la Bade Bardstown Bourbon Company release.
Okay.
The original one was way better.
The original one is killed. The MGP, where it's like, you know, I think it's like 12 to 13 years or something like that, is and put into Armagnac, choice Armagnac. Matter of fact, if I remember right, the Armagnac casks they wanted were so deeply buried within this like cellar, they had to remove the roof with a helicopter to get those casks out. If I recall correctly. So these were like choice Armagnac casks with really high end kind of MGP going into it for 18 months. And you know, it just turned out to be a stellar
That original
product.
one was
and I don't know what the secondary on it, but it's not cheap. I know that. It's probably $400 or $500, I would imagine. You know,
I don't own a Revival.
You don't own a Revival?
I've got a bunch of other Master Keeps. I don't own a Revival.
Dude,
I've tasted it. It's really good.
In my opinion, it's the best Master's Keep.
I feel really bad because I don't know if Kenny's going to be able to figure out a way to get a Revival if he wants one.
Well, you know,
losing the
I know
bidding.
where Alves lives.
for the longest
I
time,
go sneak in and grab one.
There you go.
I kind of tossed, you know, is Bottled and Bond 17 the best or is Revival the best? But when I really, like, I would say Revival only because it's one thing to just pull casks that are old and
Tastes really good.
dump them and like tastes really good. Dump
To
them.
actually curate something.
Right, like that. Like Eddie did a phenomenal job with the Bottle and Bond. He was, you know, he had a real kind of like high level to reach because, you know, American Spirit in 2007, that was a 15-year Bottle and Bond that Jimmy did, and so he had to at least get that level, which that's a hard thing to do, to like really get, you know, to that level, especially when you're dealing with old still stuff like that. And which I mean, the Bottled and Bond is old still too, but I mean that 15-year from 2007 is special.
So you have Revival and the Chateau. Is there a third one, fourth one you're playing with? Or?
Yes. So I feel like this is kind of an oddball.
Wait, I'll interrupt you here. It's Thomas S. Moore Cabernet. So
there are some like
1792 port wasn't bad though.
that wasn't that bad.
Like the original.
Yeah, no, I'm just messing
I
around.
had several like finished whiskeys that were kind of like what I'd call curiosities, where I thought they did a really cool job of doing something different. I thought that the Starlight Pinot de Charente was a really interesting. If it weren't for that, I wouldn't have even known about Pinot. Okay. So I felt like that was kind of one I had to kind of like base on. There's also some of those very, very early High West private selections back when they were still pulling MGP.
Those ryes?
Yes.
That were finished. Oh, my gosh.
The Quaddy Port.
Oh, my gosh.
The Quaddy Port double rye that from Ace Spirits.
Luckily,
it's like...
Mossack had me on some of those older ones like that.
Oh, man.
I got a couple stashed.
Just killer stuff. And so those, like, I kind of consider them curiosities. I would reference them to just be like, these were like finished whiskeys that like, ooh, I love this. So I kind of leaned on those for kind of some reference. And there were a few others, but ultimately I would say that, like, on my high end of my list, you can't beat Revival for a sherry finished bourbon. And none of this is sherry finished. None of our products are sherry finished. But Eddie did a really good job of it making it still taste like bourbon. Moreover, it still tasted like Wild Turkey. How do you do that? Like, how do you like introduce sherry and then still taste like Wild Turkey? So right. I thought that like the balance was like, that was the trick, and I even asked Eddie about it one time. I'm like, how did you get that? Like, like, what did you do? He's like, it was really simple. He's like, it had to taste like bourbon in the end. And, like, so he pulled it at the right time. He pulled it at a time when it still tasted like Wild Turkey bourbon. So that was like he's itching for that tasting.
We part an interruption by one of the dogs.
The OG's dreaming.
I love it.
Now, for me, one of my favorite finished bourbons is the Wild Turkey 15-year export.
Okay.
Finished in my belly.
I was waiting for that. Like, do you know something I don't know?
What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Finished whiskey is it's kind of a roll of the dice. I mean, you can have really good finished whiskey, and you can have kind of like half-ass, sure, for lack of a better word, finished whiskey. But I think
I've had more of those than I have.
Yeah, more of that's why the category's weighted down, right?
It's easy to take a barrel and dump it into something else.
Correct.
I mean, anybody can do that. Anybody can. I mean, I've had Mountain Dew cask Wild Turkey where people have taken a barrel and filled it with Mountain Dew and then dumped it and then filled it with, and it was actually pretty good. Yeah. But
I would try it.
That's okay.
It was called Old Mountain Turkey.
Heck yeah.
But anyway, anybody can take something and dump it into something else. The key is how, like, attentive are you going to be with it? Like, how married are you going to be to the process? How passionate are you with the process? Does this really mean something to you, or are you just trying to move liquid? So for me, it meant something to me because my family was associated to it. So I didn't want to let my dad down. Like, just straight up honest, my dad wanted nothing to do with the tastings until it was all over with. He let me have 100% control over the tasting. He was like, I want you to design the whiskey that you want to design, and then at the end I'll sign off on it.
Now, you said he was a wine guy, but does he like bourbon too?
Not really, but he actually does like our bourbon because it has very much that influence of Pineau and Armagnac. But he let me run with that and he controlled the administrative side, and I controlled the liquid side. And I actually like that because it kind of lets me stay in creative mode instead of like looking at spreadsheets and stuff like that. That makes no sense to me at all, and honestly takes from the passion and turns it into something else. And I feel like the second you get involved in the numbers,
it becomes work.
Well, it's not just work. It affects how you do things.
You look at it.
Right, because you're like, oh, we need to make money off this, or we need to profit, or we shouldn't do this for that long. I didn't want any of that. So
you just want to stay right in beast mode, right?
He kept me out of it. He kept me out of that. And like, I would say, well, I think we need to do this. And he's like, okay. It's like, because, every time you dump something or transfer it from one cask to another, it costs you money because we're paying a bottling house to do all this labor for us. And he wasn't worried about that. He was worried about the flavor. He was like, you focus on that. And it was really a relief to me because I didn't have to like look at any of that stuff. And I think if I had, it would have affected, how I did that. Like, to me, not seeing the money, not seeing the numbers, not seeing any of that just kept me zeroed in on this, What we end up with is a whiskey or two whiskeys here that I feel like are a great balance of both spirit and finishing cask. And we've got some more stuff in the works that's a little bit different. Like, these are MGP. We've got some Kentucky stuff in the works. We've got some stuff of higher age in the works. But this was our start. This was what we could start with at the time. So I feel like that's a good segue to tasting, and then maybe we get into the tasting. I can tell you the story behind what Caleb's Crossing actually means, because it's not just a throwaway name. There is actually a legitimate story that goes behind this brand.
And there's a pour in front of you.
I see that.
1993 split 12, bro.
Woo!
Good
Now,
stuff.
why'd you do this, Kenny? You're like setting this real high bar.
Why does he do anything like that? I mean, come on. No.
I had to.
That's fantastic. It's great.
At least I didn't throw out like 88 CGF.
Yeah.
So.
While we're getting ready to taste, David, I want to implore you at some point in time, band together with all the other producers and just do like a jailbreak on all the NDA stuff, right? You said we got some barrels that are tightly, what's going to happen? Say something, the NDA police going to come after you, you can end up in court. Just do it, man. Just let it fly.
Yeah, that's easy for you to say.
Yeah.
I wish I could do that.
David wants to get future barrels.
Yeah.
So no.
I don't want to go to jail.
I'm just messing around.
No, I'm just kidding. I want to go to jail, but I don't want to have any paperwork from an attorney.
My wife's a lawyer, so she would vehemently disagree with what I just told you.
Yeah. So I don't want to do that, but at the same time, I respect that producers sometimes bulk out product, especially now. Like in the past, if product was bulked out, one could argue maybe there's a quality issue. Mm-hmm. I think now they're looking at an overproduction issue. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of stuff on the wholesale market now that did not exist 2 years ago. And you guys have seen it with NDPs. I mean, there's high-aged MGP. Yep. There's high-aged Kentucky from numerous distilleries.
Yep.
And that's because they planned on a lot more sales, and then we had this downturn. And so you've got to do something, So you can sit on stuff for a while, but you can't sit on it forever. So if you got stuff that is kind of at that point where it's tasting ready, you're going to have to, if you can't bottle it and sell it yourself, you need to bulk it out. So I'm
not sure if you ever heard of buff turkey before, but it's like a thing. There's people out there that never know. I'm just joking around.
Well, I've heard of it.
So it's kind of hard.
Let's pass these bottles around.
Yeah, let's pass those around.
So here's what we're going to start with. I'm going to just kind of give you a little bit of a preview of the, not so much the flavor profile, but of the vibe. So with the bourbon is 107.06 proof, and that is what it came out of the cask at.
Ooh.
But it was slow proofed. So these were two different casks. So it's two different high rye MGP recipes. So there's a 21% rye and there's a 36% rye barrel. They each went into a different Pineau de Charentes cask, one red, one white. And then after they reached their peak maturation or finishing maturation with those casks, they went into Armagnac after that. And I look at it kind of like music. You have treble, middle, bass notes kind of thing. And in the Pineau, the bourbon, it was kind of like sweet on top of sweet. So the bourbon's already sweet by nature because it's corn based. And then the Pineau added a grape sweetness. But I needed some bass structure to it. I needed some more oak. I needed that leather. So the Armagnac kind of filled in that kind of dried fruit, oak leather kind of tannins kind of note. And it sips below proof. It is very much like Ryan Alves, said, man, this thing sips like it's
I've not heard
proof.
of him. Who's that?
He's just that joker. But supposed to be here tonight. But anyway, he had something come up. But so he said it, sipped like 90 proof. It does sip under its proof, and that's because it was slow proofed over 7 months. And just so kind of folks understand how this slow proofing worked for me, it wasn't a lot of water added. I think a lot of people might assume by the taste of it, because it's so quote unquote smooth, that they might think that it was proof down. There was no water added after it was dumped out of the cask. And in the cask, how this was proofed down was, if I pulled a sample, I would put an equivalent amount of water back into it. So if 100 milliliters of whiskey was pulled for me to sample on, maybe not immediately that day, but within a week or two after it, I would put 100 milliliters of water back into it. And the idea was to kind of just slowly kind of work it. And then the idea behind that is that water, if you just proof a spirit down after it's been dumped, you're just interacting with the spirit. So the water interacts with the spirit. There is a chemical reaction there. If you add the water to the spirit in the barrel, you're actually interacting with the oak. You're not just interacting with the barrel. So the water is now, acting with the wood. And there are chemical compounds that are water soluble that are not ethanol soluble, and so you end up with
Pulling more
profile.
out.
Oh.
Right, you end up with some profile changes when you do that right. The key is not to shock the whiskey, or cause what they call saponification, where if you add too much water too quickly, you can introduce some negative effects to the whiskey. I was really scared of doing that, so I made sure that all of the amounts that we added were small enough to where that wouldn't happen. Although, from a lot of the research I did, that's more of a problem with brandy because fruits, when you distill fruits, you have a different kind of fatty acid structure than you do grains. So you really have to worry about saponification with brandies. You don't have to really worry about it so much with whiskey. But just because I'm a nerdy scaredy cat, I made sure I was really easy with it.
So if you pulled 100 out, would you just dump 100 right back in, or would you do like 20?
Usually the way it
20?
was, I would have them pull a sample. The bottling house pull a sample. It could be 100 milliliters, could be 200 milliliters. I would get it. It would take a week or so to get it in the mail. I would taste it. I would make my notes, think about what I wanted to do with it, and say, okay, add 100 milliliters of water back. Or I might hold off and then wait till a next sample, and so now I'm 200 milliliters in, and say, okay, add 200 milliliters of water back. Like that.
I got you.
So, but it was done over a 7-month period. It wasn't like at the end I just summed it all up and just dumped a bunch of water.
Right.
So it was all like slowly done, and it was really neat to taste how the profile changed because it was very subtle, but I could keep, a library of samples, and you could tell how it slowly morphed, and how you really tell is if you take a sample from weeks or months ago and skip over some other samples and then all of a sudden jump to where you're at now, and you're like, oh wow, okay, there's a difference there.
Right.
Tasting it back to back, you don't really catch it as much, but if you skip over, you can really see wow, okay, the finishing cask and the water have really done some wonders here. So the idea here was really just to try to make a premium finished whiskey with the best that we could get off the market and really put our time and attentiveness in it. And you'll see that in the packaging as well.
It's a beautiful packaging, more like an Armagnac bottle kind of shape for me.
Exactly.
Looking at it from here.
One of my dad's favorite Armagnacs is that he can find regularly is Delord 25.
There you go.
And it has the wax top, and it has a stamp, but the stamp is on the face.
Yep.
In this case, we did it on the top of the stopper, and it has the Delord has a very Spartan kind of label. We kind of went with a little bit more than a Spartan label, but not too crazy. Very monochromatic. Tried to make it more of a classic kind of look.
Correct.
So it's pretty much, in my opinion, as close as you're going to get to a bourbon brandy hybrid. As far as packaging design, it has a little bit of both elements to it.
Was that printed with an 1800s printing press?
No. No, we hand driven labor.
Love it.
That's awesome. All right, so let me pass this around. Let's
Yeah.
start with the bourbon
Yeah.
here. I'm gonna get me a little some too.
So now, what's the little thing on the little medallion hanging there? Just the logo for Caleb's Crossing?
Sir,
that is part of the story.
Okay.
So
Sorry,
do you want me to go
jumping
ahead
ahead.
and get into
Sure.
that?
No, you're
Get
good.
into it, bro.
Okay, so when we were kind of figuring out what are we going to do, what are we going to call this, we're talking late 2023. He said, he was trying to come up with a brand name that would kind of marry both American and French, kind of roots. And he came up with Washington Lafayette, which is obviously a play on George Washington and Pierre Lafayette, who were friends in the Revolutionary War, and the French helped us out, and it kind of made sense. The only problem was it didn't really have a pizzazz to it as a whiskey brand. What is the Washington Lafayette? It didn't really it didn't sound like a whiskey brand. So we held on to it. We went through some different label designs. My friend Ricky Frame is a graphic designer. He did both of my books. He's done a lot of my tater stickers for bottles, and he did the
Tater stickers.
he did the Raconteur Rye label, which a lot of people enjoy.
It's awesome.
I
That
think Ricky
label
knocked it
is
out of the park
legit.
with that one.
beautiful label. Yeah.
So he was like, well, what do y'all want to do? And we told him, and he came up with some ideas, but as good as his work was, it just didn't have that catch,
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there folding laundry one day, and I'm thinking about we really just wish we had something else that kind of tied to our family history. And I started thinking about family history names, and I thought about Kelly Jennings, who was my 6th great-grandfather, and I thought about Caleb Jennings, who was my 5th great-grandfather. And I just kind of played on that, and I knew Caleb's story really well because my grandfather started our family history years ago, and he passed it on to my dad, and then my dad passed it on to me. And in 2013, I went on a deep dive with our family history. 2011, 2012, 2013.
I know my grandfather. That's about it.
Well, I went on a deep dive. I signed up for Ancestry. I did the DNA test. I contacted different genealogical societies in different states to really nail this stuff down. And I got hardcore genealogical records.
That'd be cool.
So what it turns out is as far as back as I could go with the United States, Kelly Jennings is my 6th great grandfather. Apparently, it seems like he came off the boat, I guess you would say, in the early 1700s. He had 3 children, 2 sons, Caleb and Joshua, and then a daughter, Mary. He died when Caleb was younger than 14, so at those times, a 14-year-old male could speak for himself.
He's probably married with 2 kids already at 14.
Yeah. 8 jobs.
So if you were 14, you were considered an adult male.
Yeah.
If you were a male at 14. But he was not. So, he ended up going into an indentured apprenticeship. So basically an indentured servant. And so he worked for a master in Orange County, Virginia, making leather. So
that's so cool you found all that stuff out.
Yeah, it's really neat because all the stuff's hard. It's in print. So he ended up indenturing himself to a leather worker. And shortly after that, he's found on muster rolls in that county with the sons of that his master. And then later in the Continental Army and Taylor's Regiment of Guards in Charlottesville, again with the sons of his master. And he served the entire Revolutionary War. And then after the war was over with, of course, he was old enough at that time to kind of, sell the land. So he sold it. Him and his brother Joshua sold their father's land in Goochland, Virginia. They're actually neighbors with Thomas Jefferson. When I say neighbors, we're talking about hundreds of acres here. But if you go look at the deed books, their border was there with Jefferson. And they sold their land. They moved to North Carolina temporarily, then moved to Georgia. Joshua stayed in Georgia. And as best I can tell, the land that he established his homestead on is where Emory University is now. And then Caleb crossed the Savannah River into South Carolina and bought land from a Frenchman named Jean Emery. So there were French Huguenots that came across the ocean, landed in Charleston. Some of them settled in what is now McCormick, South Carolina. At that time, it was called New Bordeaux. It was a French town.
Oh,
and the rest of them came to Lawrenceburg, Lawrenceburg, Kentucky.
Oh, really?
Where Wild Turkey is now, which is the Rippey family. So it's kind of interesting how that connects. Yeah, and Kenny looks mind blown. But those same French Huguenots, you can go and look at the ship records, and some of them stayed in New Bordeaux, and some of them went to Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, or they called it Tyrone.
Are you saying that whiskey making is in your blood, sir?
Well, we don't have any evidence that Caleb distilled whiskey or brandy.
All right.
He did purchase a large plot of land in New Bordeaux. There were vineyards there in New Bordeaux. It was a French town, so obviously there was French wine, there was French cuisine, probably French brandy, because back then if you were a farmer, which he was.
French fries.
Yeah, French toast.
It's White Castle time. No, I'm just kidding.
you didn't waste anything. So like if you had grapes that weren't good enough for wine production, you would just distill that, and make brandy. Or if you had grains that weren't good for anything, you would just distill them off. You didn't waste anything. So the chances of him using a still are pretty good, But can we tie it down and say he was a distiller? No. Was he exposed to French culture? Sure. I mean, he lived in a French town. I'm sure he was exposed to French wine and brandy and cuisine and these types of things. We just don't know. But he lived there until he died. And one thing I found that was really cool, if you read the indenture of Caleb's service, it says that his master, in exchange for his labor, so in exchange for Caleb's labor, the master had to teach him a skill, which in this case was leatherworking, and he also had to teach him the Bible, and then he had to teach him how to read and write. And one thing that's interesting is Caleb's will is written in his own hand, whereas a lot of wills at that time had to be written by someone else because people weren't because they weren't literate. I mean, this was a different time, but his was actually written in his own hand. We actually have Caleb's signature, and that's going to go into some future bottlings.
Nice.
Are you serious?
So these are wax.
David.
Yeah. It's really cool.
Dude.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is if it's wine or brandy finished, it's going to have the wax seal.
Okay.
If it's going to be a wood finish, or maybe in the possibility that we do a straight expression, it's going to have a strip, and that strip is going to have Caleb's signature on it. We were able to get it off of his will, so it'll have Caleb Jennings on the actual strip.
Dude.
So, isn't that cool?
No, that is like incredibly cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
Finding.
So it was just the perfect thing to like tie back to our family. So this is our fifth, my dad's fourth great grandfather, my fifth great grandfather. And, he actually lived in a French town. So, it just kind of makes sense to have that American French connection there with this story.
I'm very disappointed that you actually have a real story.
Well, it's not one of those things where like I found my grandpappy's recipe,
Right,
and all
exactly.
that. But
I was expecting that,
it's a nod to the family. So, Jason, you were asking about the coin on here.
Yeah.
So what this symbolizes is, so obviously the obverse of the coin says CC, so that's Caleb's Crossing. It's meant to mimic old, colonial coinage, 18th century coinage, which, the pennies back then were this size. They were these big, hunks of copper. On the backside, you have the drum and the fife, and that's representative of his service in the Revolutionary War. But also the coin itself is representative of what he would have had to pay the ferryman to cross the Savannah River. So he was in Georgia, so he had to move to South Carolina. You would have had to use a ferry, and that was really common back then. So you would have to pay the ferryman in coin.
That's awesome.
So it kind of ties that in. And if you look at the top of the seal is also the fife and drum to symbolize his service in the American Revolutionary War. So, and then if you look at the label here, this is Caleb and Joshua. So that's Caleb and his brother overlooking the Savannah River and kind of making a decision about what they're going to do. And obviously Caleb decides to cross and Joshua decides to stay. Mm-hmm. So this is a big turning point in his life. He's deciding that the rest of his life is going to be spent in South Carolina.
You did not cut any corners on this one.
No.
We really put a lot of passion into
for
it.
Sure.
And I'll have to say that, Ricky, he sketched all of this. This is all Ricky's doing. We told him what we wanted.
Wow.
We didn't give him any kind of
He did the Raconteur though as well.
He did the Raconteur as well. And we said, look, we need it to be this. And we kind of told him our story and family history and everything. And I gave him some like samples of some like bottles I think that look classy and look good, but they look nothing like this. It was just kind of like, I want it to be simple but classy, and I think he did a really good job of making it, but then also making it look like it's not cheap either. Like, you can go too simple and you end up with something that looks cheap, and I didn't want something. I wanted something that looked high end.
It's like it's something you found in somebody's cellar, from 80 years ago. You stumble across. I mean, the label's modern, but still, it's very
monochromatic.
Yes,
I
like it.
Some people have said Maker's Mark. Obviously there's no trademark stuff going on. There's no drippy wax,
drip.
But it does have that monochromatic look. But Maker's, I feel like, is a little bit more.
You have to watch
looking.
the slant now too.
Yeah,
I've been told somebody else owns the slants.
Oh gosh.
So we got to watch the drip and the slants.
The drip and the slants.
So what did your dad think about it when you got the finished product with the labels?
Loved it.
And
Loved it, and he loved the taste too. He's not a big whiskey guy, so I was kind of nervous about what he would think of it. And honestly, I thought he would like the bourbon. I was really scared about the rye because the rye is, which we need to pass that around. The rye is a different beast, because 95.5 rye,
right?
That's not your
it's not barely
everyday bourbon person's kind of thing, And but the funny thing is, he called me up and he's just like, I love the bourbon, but man, this rye is just really something else. I'm like, you really like the rye? And he's just like, I love it. He's just like, it's complex. He's just like, this is so. To hear my dad's actually kind of a rye guy was like, that was kind of cool because I was expecting the opposite. I was expecting this is just too much. It's too pungent or something. Because how 95.5 is. And so
I see a distinct color difference in the rye versus the bourbon.
Well, you know what that is?
What is it?
It's mainly the Kelvin. So the right off the bat, before any finishing, the rye was already darker than the bourbon. I mean, it's older. It's 8 years, whereas the bourbon's a blend of 6 and 7. Okay. This is 8 years, but that Kelvin barrel was just a monster from day one. I mean, I could have bottled it without any finishing, and people would have been happy with it.
Wow.
But the Pineau is what gives it that reddish tone. So you've got the darkness, but if you kind of look, it has, especially if you kind of hold it out to the side and you look at it has a red quality to it, and that is from the Pineau.
That's from the.
I've been drinking the bourbon.
Okay, so the rye now,
and it is just, I don't get the ethanol. Like I said, it tastes under proof.
Yep.
But it also tastes just like very balanced, and it's going to sound weird, but a sophisticated drink. It's just sophisticated tasting.
That's kind of what Ryan said. He said, he's like, I like these both for totally different reasons. He's like, they're like opposite ends of the spectrum. The rye is definitely, it's got a higher proof, number one, but you get like a lot more like.
I haven't tasted the rye yet.
You get a lot more variety in the notes. You normally do with 95.5. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
The bourbon pairs very well with a cigar.
I was going to say, it reminds me like I'm in a old school lounge and a leather chair, and I'm sitting back with, that's what that bourbon.
And that's what I wanted the bourbon to be.
You hit
really
it
subtle.
Good.
Yeah.
Really
I wanted it to, thank you. I wanted it to be a sweet, but not overly sweet. I wanted it to have some tannins to it, but not overly tannic. I wanted it to be kind of like that leather chair pour, like you just said. I wanted that leather chair pipe or cigar kind of whiskey. I don't want to call it cigar blend. I think that's overplayed.
Right.
I just think that it would. I wanted it to work with tobacco.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love to just throw this out here, and you can tell me whatever. But the bourbon to me has like almost like, I don't know how else to describe it. Only at, what did you say, 107?
107.
107 proof. It almost has like a soaked flavor, if that makes sense. Meaning that it's not overpowering, but it like you can tell the influence of the cask depth. That's exactly right. I call it soaked depth. Golden raisin kind of nose to it.
Yes.
And then just like this nice layering of it's almost like a, I think you said leather, I would call it like cigar. You said cigar, but like that
Humidor kind of
humidor, oaky, but ashy, and a sweet like cigar box kind of flavor to it.
I get like fruit
crazy.
leather, like dried fruit.
There you go, exactly. Yeah.
Like cherry skins and stuff like that.
Crazy.
That was what I wanted for the bourbon. I wanted the bourbon to be like a sipping experience where it's just an easy sipper, kind of like pairs well with a cigar. You could just have it on the porch by like a real hefty pour.
Right.
The rye is, when I was telling Victor Sizemore, who did the photography for our website, when I was talking to him about it, he was kind of asking me for like some cues on photography, and I said it's kind of like this. I like the bourbon kind of fits more in like a brandy snifter, whereas like the rye fits more in like a copita or like a wine glass, like a stemmed glassware. Like the rye has more of a fancy pants kind of thing, whereas like the bourbon is definitely more the just sit back in the leather chair.
It tastes sophisticated,
but like the rye is pinkies out. The rye is pinkies out.
That's Anthony's drink. Then.
Well, I haven't had it yet. I mean, maybe it will be mine. There you go.
I don't want to press ahead, but just looking, like bottles. So, how many bottles of the bourbon are you releasing this time?
All right, so with the bourbon, there's about 350 or so.
Okay.
340 or so bottles.
It's a pretty small release.
Yeah, and then the rye is like about 150-ish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because the rye is a single barrel.
Okay.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I need that in my life. Maybe. I don't know. I haven't tasted
I haven't tasted the rye yet.
It was one of those things where, we're kind of dipping our toes in the pool.
Sure. Trying it out.
And as much as we had thought about starting with the big batch, I felt like if I was going to control this and the way that I wanted to control it, it really needed to kind of be very small, like 2 to 3 barrels tops. With the rye, the idea was to kind of build on it. But once I tasted how it was developing, it was kind of like, I don't really want to mess with it anymore. It was kind of like this was kind of where it needed to be. And so I felt like to just make it a bigger batch just to make it a bigger batch is kind of doing it a disservice. I'm like not doing it by taste. And if you remember earlier, I was saying like everything had to be by
if you change
taste.
a batch up, dude, it can change totally.
It can change
totally.
I mean, you can ruin it.
It's like if you're doing brownies or a cake, you can't just double the recipe on.
That's right.
It's different.
It's different. So I felt like the rye was where it needed to be, and I didn't want to mess with it anymore. Now
I know we're not rating, but rye's a pie.
I haven't tasted the rye yet.
Don't.
Just
don't.
They're
Pass it down here.
Jeez, man.
very different experiences.
Hey, David, how much are these going to be on Bourbon Outfitter?
They're $150. $150 a piece.
And Raconteur was $130.
$130. And the reason behind that is, a lot was put into these. I mean, a lot of time, a lot of money, and we don't own a distillery or even a warehouse.
Can I can interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
I think it's 100% warranted.
Well, thank
For it to be
you.
150,
We put a lot into it.
But please go ahead.
All of this was contracted. Like we had to work with a bottling house, and of course it was all under my direction with the liquid, like what we wanted to do with it and everything. But it was not cheap. It was expensive to make, so therefore we have to charge.
Is it the bottling house that I know, or somebody different?
No, it's somebody you know.
Okay, all right,
somebody,
cool.
And well, I'll just say it.
If you can, I don't.
Divine did a wonderful job, and I cannot thank Abigail Felix enough for the work that she put into this expression and her crew, her team. I mean, like the simplest things, like when that we were coming up with the wax and like how far down the neck, and she would send me pictures of different things. We went through multiple different variations of color on the wax to get the right exact color that we wanted. And then when it came to doing the seal on the top, the original plan was you dip it in the wax and then you let it sit for a second and then you do the seal. But what happened was it ended up either you'd push it too far going to the cork, or it would peel back off. And so this required a second heating just to get that stamp on there. So they would wax it, cool it.
There's a little more labor involved.
A lot of labor involved in it. And she was so meticulous because she would send me pictures. Is this good? Is this good? Is this how you want? And like just really, putting in the time to make sure that this was right. And I can't say thank you enough to them for like really going all out and putting a lot of care into this. And then the day it was finally done and they bottled it, they had some remains and they let some of the folks on the line taste it, and I got like some amazing feedback from some of these people, and it really made me happy to kind of.
So why'd you choose red? Especially for like the rye, you can't really tell them apart.
It was very much kind of it's
maroon.
I'm sorry.
It's
I would say red too.
It's kind of
red maroon.
If you look at a lot of like the brandies that are sealed with wax, a lot of them are either black or red or deep red. So we kind of we looked at both, and we felt like the black kind of was a little bit too dull for what we wanted. We had Ricky do some mock-ups of some different colors on the neck to see what they might look like. Matter of fact, we had started out with the rye was going to be green.
Oh, yeah, right. Why? Why though?
And my dad was like, that is the ugliest.
Oh, no.
He's like, we are not doing green wax. I'm like, Dad, but like all the rye is green. And he's like, I don't care what everybody else is doing. They're like, we're not doing green wax. It looks ugly. And I'm like, you're the boss.
Okay.
And he was right. And I started thinking, I'm like, think about Van Winkle rye. There's not a drop of green on the damn thing. Right. And I'm like, you know what? He's right. I'm like,
also
go with what looks best. Don't do something because everybody else is doing it. And so he made the right call.
Carolina killer, right?
What's that?
It's also a little South Carolina killer.
Yeah, we got to have the crimson, right?
Work it in there.
Yeah. So, or garnet and black.
It's a very nice.
But yeah, he was just like, he made the call. He was like, we're doing red, and putting my foot down on it. And I was like, you're right, Dad. The red was the way to go with it.
It looks great.
What's the proof on the rye?
113.77.
I think the rye drink's under proof than the bourbon.
Really? You think so?
Dude, this rye is...
You a fan of the rye?
Gosh, wow. Now, you could... I don't blind like I used to, but I'm still decent at picking stuff out. You could blind me with this, and I would lose whatever I bet. This doesn't taste like 95.5.
Wow.
Like I would...
Yeah, definitely.
Like I'd lose all the money in the world that I had. I'd lose my house, my car for betting. This was not... This doesn't taste like 95.5, man.
We don't want the house, the car.
That is a lot on the line.
This is the bourbon. Yeah. Bourbon probably worth more than the house.
Well, I'm glad you like it.
It's very good.
There were a lot of sleepless nights. Like I would like, do I pull it now? Do I not pull it now? And then when it came to the time to like actually dump it, I would like second guess myself, third guess myself. I'd like wake up in the morning, like I'd go to bed at night, like I should taste it one more time. And I'd jump up and be like 1 a.m. I'd do a little pour, and I'd be like, my brain's not right. I need to wait till the morning. I'd wake up first thing, more alarm would go off. I'd pour a little bit. Like it really weighed on my mind. Do I have this right? Do I have the timing right on these? And
zero ethanol, man. Zero bite. Zero draw you up.
Yeah. No sulfur notes.
None. Zero.
No.
Like my brother, this kind of rye my brother would like, because he's not a big rye guy in general.
Yeah.
He would love this rye.
Yeah, and my dad loved it too. I was for sure he was like, not going to like this, but he actually liked the rye. He said the bourbon fills the niche that he had with buying Armagnac. So he likes to buy Armagnac, and he's like, this checks that box. He's like, I could just sip Caleb's Crossing bourbon and check that Armagnac box. For the rye, he was like, I was not expecting it to be what it was going to be, and so just two different drinking experiences.
They are.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like when you talk about how you've done the finishing process, and people could figure out like, okay, maybe these are going to taste similar or whatever. They couldn't be. They're very different.
Very different.
And in a really good way.
Well, thank you.
Which is fantastic. I mean, I like both expressions.
It was nice to get that feedback from Ryan early on too, because he was like, dude, I like these for totally different reasons.
Right.
Like, if someone's a cigar smoker, I couldn't recommend the bourbon more. I think that would be the perfect thing to sit back in a relaxing chair and have with your cigar. I did end up trying different pairings with both of these when I got done to kind of see, like, I'm just not a big rye cigar guy. Like, I just don't really think rye is like a cigar, spirit. I feel like rum and brandy, cocktails, and bourbon do better with cigars. Rye to me is more something best sipped on its own or in a cocktail. And I feel like this is kind of the contemplative, neat sipper. This is something I discovered, and I passed it on to a couple friends that have actually tried this. Truth be told, these were not my favorite proofs. So I actually preferred Caleb's Crossing Bourbon at 101, but I felt like if I proofed it anymore, I might lose some of the people that kind of wanted a little bit more oomph to it. So I stopped there. With the rye, I liked the rye at 107. When I tested it at home in glasses, doing with my hydrometer and doing the test and everything, same thing. I just felt like it would probably be best to leave it.
Wow.
The bourbon, you're not going to get a whole bunch of change if you add a little water to it. I think I made the right call leaving it where it was at. The rye, though, if you add a couple drops of water to the rye, it changes the profile. I'm not kidding you. So if you want to try it, you can. I recommend anybody that purchases these to give them a little bit of water each, and it will change how it tastes. I'd say 3 or 4 drops of water.
Give it a try.
Yeah, give it a try. It does change it a little bit. I think you'll be surprised at how it kind of morphs a little bit.
So, one question for you.
Ding!
So, looking, just kind of off the wall here, but I know bourbon's definitely a hobby of yours.
Yeah.
Do you have any other hobbies? Anything else you enjoy doing?
Well, bourbon has actually become my job now. By the way, if y'all want any more of these are Ryan Alvis's bottles, so drink all you want to.
Oh, okay, great.
He said we can have a free-for-all and finish them.
I'll take a $200 sample.
Nice and all right.
But anyway, so I was into coin collecting for a long time. Before that, I was a musician. I wrote songs, I produced music. I got really into music production and engineering for a long time. And then when I had my first child, I was at home a lot more, and I realized that, I couldn't go to the studio. My dad has a recording studio. I couldn't really go there and work with artists anymore like I used to, because I was very much tied to my son because my wife was in medical school and all that. So I picked up numismatics, which is coin collecting, as a hobby. I was really intrigued by the history of it and just the artwork and the various facets like toning and all these kind of things really spoke to me. And only thing is about that hobby is it's quite expensive. I mean, at first it's not. You can go to the bank and get rolls of this and look for, maybe I'll find a silver quarter or something like that, and that's fun at first. And then once you get, it's just like bourbon. Yeah. At first it's a lot of fun. It's just you go in the shelves or it's this infinite thing. You get into it enough and you're just you go to the liquor store now and you're just yawn,
There's
I've seen all this.
bottles you don't want to buy.
Yeah.
It's crazy
100%.
walking into a liquor store.
Yeah.
And so it got to where with coin collecting was the only stuff I was really interested in was stuff that cost a lot of money, and I just couldn't afford it because I had a small child and there was just no way for me to. So around 2013 or so, my brother-in-law, it was Halloween. I'll never forget it. It was a cold. It was 20 degrees. It was really cold Halloween for South Carolina, and he was just hey dude, you want some of this before we go out? And he pulled out this Crown Royal bottle. And I'm thinking he's going to put it in some Coke or something. We're going to go out and have a good walk around the neighborhood. And he just puts it over ice. And I'm like, okay, I've never really sipped whiskey. I've done shots and stuff. I've never really sipped it like that. And I was like, this is kind of cool. I can kind of just sip and enjoy this and not get slammed, and I made it a point to go out and try to find the best whiskey in the world, and you go out and you're doing your research, you're listening to the blogs, you're reading the magazines, you're buying the books and all this kind of stuff.
Listen to the mashup.
When you have nothing better to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. That's why we had you here.
And you know, you all know how it is. You get into it, you know, or you do like
Head over
Kenny,
heels.
and like the next day, you know, you take out a second mortgage. And anyway,
That's a lot. That's a lot.
so you know, it's funny how all this happens. It's like you don't intend. Like I guess that's how hobbies work. It's like you find something, and it just like. I've noticed that it tends to happen a lot more with males, where they get into like something, they go just die hard, like right into, like dive in 100, like just 100%. Like this is it for me. Whether it's golf,
like
or tennis, or cars,
action
or whatever.
figures showing up at your house,
Shoes.
Shoes.
Pokemon cards, whatever.
My wife will tell you it's much different with guys and girls.
There you
She
go.
knows I'm
There
head
you
first
go.
when I get into a hobby.
Yeah.
You get into a hobby, and like you just go in and like.
We're agreeing with you. Yeah.
So that's what happened with this, is like with whiskey, is just like, and I think what I liked most about it is like there is, you know, a factor with drinking alcohol. It's a very you know, especially when you're with a group of people, it kind of breaks down barriers. You kind of have conversations that you might not normally have. You know, the grape and the grain do something for conversation, you know, whether it's wine or whiskey, whatever. It opens some doors. I mean, yes, there is some trouble there. You can have problems if you allow yourself to, but if you're mindful and you're respectful of the spirit, you know, there's good things there. And there's also a history element. Today, you know, Ryan and I went to Buffalo Trace. I've been to Buffalo Trace before and had visits, but today we did the full hard hat tour and did a private barrel experience. And what I found so neat about Buffalo Trace is they have preserved everything they can.
Yeah.
I mean, the old buildings, whether it's the buildings that Blanton built or the buildings that Taylor built, or
the secondary,
or the stuff that
Oh, jeez.
Low blow.
Shots fired.
But it was cool to see the old
cool.
OFC where they've dug up where
Dude, that
the
is-
riverbed
that is
used
awesome
to be
right there.
and all
That
that.
is crazy.
And they're
It is-
actually making it right there.
Yeah, they're actually making some.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, this is what I love about whiskey, specifically bourbon, is that there is this story to be told. And if you step away from the madness of the secondary, if you step away from the hype and the chase and the how much is this bottle worth, and, you know, my barrel's better than your barrel, if you step away from all that bullshit and you look at like, where did we come from? It's pretty amazing. Mm-hmm. And like I sat there and I told our tour guide, who was awesome, his name's Jimmy, just an awesome guy. I told him, I said, you know, wouldn't it be cool if like Albert Blanton or Colonel Taylor could come to the future, could come now and arrive now and like see how like what they built is actually
what it's become,
bigger than they ever imagined.
Right.
I mean, they would feel so vindicated because they put their whole heart and passion into like keeping that distillery alive, and even going through Prohibition. You know, well, before that, you went through World War I. You had the Great Depression. You had Prohibition. You had World War II. You had the Cold War. You had the Glut. I mean, so many things that
Hippies.
That hippies.
All that stuff.
Hey, well, that's what kind of caused the Glut, you know.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, if they could, if they could come to where we are now, and see what we have now, they would be like floored. They would they would probably be honored. Well, to some degree, they might be like, "What the hell's this?" You know, like, "What's Traveler?"
I bet.
Sorry,
I bet. I bet the
Canadian
process.
whiskey.
I bet they would be
Smooth as
floored by the
Canadian
process.
Give me some Fireball. You know.
I bet they'd be floored by the
99
process.
bananas.
So, like, you know, how much has changed in the process from when they started. I bet they just wouldn't understand it you know, at that point. But, you know, see the fever around bourbon, oh, man, how much more would that be?
Yeah.
You know, your whole life was about this. And
Now, the closest thing you have to that is freaking 90-year-old Jimmy Russell, dude.
No shit.
That's just not amazing.
Yeah.
It's true.
Like, that is a true, legit icon.
Yeah.
True.
Well, now that you say that, maybe Blanton and Taylor wouldn't be so impressed, because Jimmy is very, I don't want to say matter-of-factly, I think he's proud of where bourbon's at.
Sure.
I think he knows that he did a good job. But at the same time, he's not one to hype anything up. He's always kind of had that same kind of outlook on bourbon, and it's always been about Kentucky, It's always been about his family. It's always been about his neighborhood, his coworkers. It's not been about global domination or like being the best, in the world, or who's got the best sales or what's your case volume and all that kind of stuff. Like none of that, I think, really matters to Jimmy as much as am I putting out a consistently good product that I'm proud of. And I think
what we always say is the best whiskey you drink is just shared around a table with friends.
Yeah.
So I mean, it is what it is there.
Yeah. And he talks about that all the time about, sitting around with a bunch of guys playing cards, smoking cigars, drinking whiskey, and that's kind of, to him, that's what bourbon's always been. Now, he realizes that it's grown past that, and it involves a lot more people of various ages and cultures and genders. He realizes it's a bigger thing than what it is when he grew up. But at the same time, it's still the core.
Bourbon's good.
You like that, huh?
Yeah.
I just went back to the bourbon again.
Yeah.
Bourbon's good.
Bourbon's
Bourbon's
actually really good. Holy crap.
Yeah.
And you're right too. The rye changed a lot with just a little drop of water.
It does. It's really kind of interesting
I like
how
them both.
it morphs into like the bourbon. You don't really get much of a difference by adding water. I mean, it'll change a little bit, but the rye changes pretty dramatically with water. I don't know why that is, but it does.
Yeah. When you mentioned Jimmy Russell a second ago, I was thinking about I had my second tour at Wild Turkey in 2015 and with friends in town. And I walk into the gift shop. It's when the new thing was open, right? 2015, they were open. And Jimmy is just sitting in the chair, like the high chair. And I remember I'm like, oh, my God, I got to go buy a bottle to get Jimmy to sign it. And so I ran over and bought a bottle. And there wasn't like a line or anything. And I walked over and I'm like, hey, will you sign my bottle? And I think he said, what do you think I'm here for? I think he said that. And I remember I was like, I feel like an idiot, but he took a picture with me and I got that bottle. I've never opened it. It's sitting there. And it was a great moment. And my buddy was visiting from Ohio with his wife. And it was before we had kids, me and my wife. And before they had kids, too. It was just a great day. And it was so fun. And the first tour I ever had at Wild Turkey, Bruce gave us the tour.
Cool.
It's the same here.
He was home from college, and I'm just like, okay, so like I get all that, and they're so down to earth, like the whole family.
Yeah.
Just from the observations that I've seen, and I'm just like, yeah, I get what you're saying. He might understand that, but he is kind of like grounded in what he's grounded in.
Absolutely,
you know what I mean? Which is amazing.
He's still kind of got that same mindset that he had back when he kind of first started. He recognizes the changes in the industry, and he's not fighting it, like trying to be the grumpy old man. But at the same time, he's unapologetic about.
He likes 8-year 101.
He knows what he likes.
Right.
Yeah, he knows what he likes, and he's not compromising on that. And I think that's why a lot of people appreciate him, because he's a great conversationalist. He's a big supporter of Kentucky bourbon. He's kind of like the top brand ambassador of Kentucky bourbon. Like if you said who is the brand ambassador of Kentucky bourbon, it's pretty much Jimmy Russell. I mean, like who can you name that's that high of a level?
One more thing I want to jump in and say is, you did a pick at Knob Creek recently, and it was the first time I ever been in the restaurant over there. And in the restaurant, there's all those pictures of Booker.
Yeah,
and we're sitting at the table that's in the corner with all the pictures there. And I turn around and look at them, and I'm like, this is crazy, because I grew up like as a third-generation Greek immigrant guy, right, in Northeast Ohio, with my grandparents and great-grandparents and luckily multiple generations of family. And I look at those pictures of Booker and Fred and Freddie, and I'm like,
beans and country ham.
Yeah, and the country hams and things. It's a different kind of cuisine, but it's the same pictures, like things I can relate to, and that's what matters, right? And so I looked at those pictures, and I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. And so, anyway, I just wanted to impart that, because I feel like the things that you're talking about are super important, and that's what connects people to whiskey, right? It's bourbon history, but like it connects to everybody. It's not just like I wasn't into bourbon back then, nothing else. I look at those pictures of family, and I'm like, I can relate. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Sure.
So,
well, and just back to what David was saying too. I mean, with his dad, right? Like, how cool would that be to have a brand like this or bottling like this with your dad?
Right. 100%. It's amazing.
Yeah,
it's awesome,
absolutely.
dude.
I have to pinch myself at night sometimes just thinking about how cool this is, because whereas we worked together in the past in the insurance industry and working for a bank, it's not as cool as like a whiskey brand. So, it's pretty awesome. I mean, and he's a creative guy. Like, he and I both write songs. I haven't written a song in a long time, but he's a good songwriter, a lot better than me. And I really think that, had it not been for having 5 kids, he probably could have. I mean, he played the Bluebird in Nashville and stuff.
wow.
I mean, he could have probably gone somewhere with that if he
play-
really wanted to. If he wanted to just really
Play
go
guitar? Or is it
yeah,
what you both play?
guitar, piano, sings, and writes fantastic songs. I really feel like he probably could have taken that somewhere if he wanted to, but instead he chose to be a dad, and I'm glad that he did because it gave me the childhood I had. But he actually wrote a song for Caleb's Crossing, believe it or not.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and
You're
Spotify?
So just sing it. Go ahead and sing it.
no, I can't sing it.
Here we go.
Acapella.
Yeah, but yeah, it's actually kind of cool. Like I was like, okay, well, let's do it. And I was like, that's. But he's not. It's for someone else. It's for a bluegrass.
Gotcha.
Band to kind of perform, and you might hear it in little snippets
If
down
it comes
the road.
out, let us know.
Promo videos or something. We do whatever. But it just really was.
This is completely thought out, dude. This is literally is a complete.
But it
that's
wasn't.
awesome.
I'll have to show y'all after we get done. Like the pictures, like
But I'm saying it's complete. I mean, it's just
it came
awesome.
together slowly. Like it wasn't prefabricated. Like
Right.
we came out with like
you
we're going
can
to do
tell it's
Washington
genuine.
Lafayette, and it turned into Caleb's Crossing, and it just all kind of came together. It was this really very organic, very thought out. We had a lot of time to think about how we were going to do this, and we've gotten to the point now where like Washington Lafayette is not even really an expression to us. That's just more like the company name. And the Caleb's Crossing is where we want to keep that focus because it's that family connection, and it's that nod to our past and just working together as a family, kind of doing something together. Maybe I can pass this down on to my kids. You just never know.
Just think of the legacy you have with your dad with this bottle.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
with Caleb.
I see
beautiful.
things like
Who knew he was going to be a bottle of bourbon?
it's pretty wild to think about, honestly. I think about, a lot of the heritage families in Kentucky, and of course I'm not a Kentucky, resident, but
We'll claim you.
There you go.
I
Good job.
admire, people like the Russells, people like the Noes, the Beams,
Right.
people like Jillian and his father and his grandfather and his son, like these multi-generational things, they mean something. It's not just like we're just doing it because my dad did it. It's like you either do it because you're passionate or you get out,
Right.
And there have been people that have gotten out, but there's probably been a lot of families in the past that.
Speaking of that, though, man, with Bruce having a bigger prominent role in Wild Turkey,
Can't wait.
I cannot wait for some
Oh yeah.
10 to 12 to 14 year
Heck
barrel
yeah.
proof ryes coming out
No
that is
kidding.
going to be off the charts.
Yeah, it's about time.
Cannot wait. Cannot wait.
I think that it's interesting because I feel like each Russell kind of has. Oh, I bought one today.
8.5 year rye.
That's
Now it's
fantastic.
101.
Yep.
But wait till they put out this 10 and 11 and 12 and 13 year barrel proof ryes.
No kidding.
Under some other whatever.
It's about time we have a barrel proof rye LE from Wild
Cannot
Turkey.
Wait. Cannot wait.
But it's each member of the Russell family has kind of given their own little unique kind of spin on Wild Turkey, but without making it something that's not
Totally
Wild
different.
Turkey.
Right. It's still the same.
It's still Wild
Right.
Turkey. It like, Jimmy has his kind of thing. Eddie's had his kind of thing. And now Bruce gets to have his own kind of thing. What I find interesting about Bruce is that he's got like kind of the best attributes of Jimmy and Eddie combined.
Yeah.
It's like, Jimmy he's real personable, good storyteller. You can sit down and talk with him for hours, but he's very married to a specific profile. He's not really into anything experimental. He's not going to go crazy about certain rick houses like we do and all that. Whereas Eddie's quiet. He's not he's not like the person you're going to sit down and like have a long 2-hour storytelling kind of adventure with. But Eddie knows his whiskey and he knows it really damn well. And he's actually kind of really fun to talk to if you just kind of like can accept that it's not the Jimmy kind of thing. And Eddie, he can experiment. He likes taking whiskeys and aging them out longer than Jimmy likes them. He likes doing things in finishing casks. He's not afraid to try blends and stuff that Jimmy probably wouldn't have done. And he actually has taken a liking to rye, thanks to Bruce, whereas Jimmy's not really a rye person. He makes it.
Right.
He just doesn't appreciate it like, Bruce.
We do.
Right, like we do. I always use the Quigley Down Under. Have y'all ever seen Quigley Down Under? At the very end where he's like, I never said I didn't know how to use it, So, like Jimmy, he knows how to make rye. It may not be his choice, He can make a damn good rye, but it's just not his thing,
right.
you know. It's that Quigley Down Under thing. And but was Eddie kind of is more like pushing into Bruce's territory with the rye. And then now with Bruce kind of taking a more prominent role, I think we're going to see rye as more of a spotlight instead of just an accent.
But their rye is so amazing.
Right.
Gosh.
Right. Like for and I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I mean, this is obviously something that Bruce and Grant, you know, were a big part of, Pablo as well. Pride of Anderson County.
Yes, those ryes are next level.
The 9.5 year.
Oh my gosh.
To me, I mean, and again, I did not pick those barrels. Okay, Bruce and Grant picked those barrels for those first
for
the rye,
you
for
and
the two
Pablo
ryes,
and,
right?
Yeah,
right. And then it was up to me and Pablo to kind of sign off on them. That 9.5 year rye, to me, is like, people might laugh at me for this, but again, this was all Bruce and Grant. I feel like that 9.5 year Pride of Anderson County rye is like Booker's rye level, in my opinion. Now, other people might say you're crazy, whatever, but to me, it's that level. It's that level of quality. Now, in a blind, would it win? Maybe, maybe not, but I think that somebody would say these are in the same league. And then the 10 year is awesome too. It's just it's more of a bourbon-y kind of rye profile, but that first one, that 9.5 year, just like, it's just perfect. It's just right where it needs to be, and I'm very, very proud of that one.
Yeah, definitely, man.
Yep. Well, I'm glad y'all like the whiskey. I'm always nervous because, finished whiskey, like I said, that carries a stigma sometimes, and unjustly.
Well, but I think it's like, so my background's a little more in beer. I mean, bourbon's there for me for sure, but you see like the pastry stouts, I'll call them. So in beer, they're adding cookies and adding whatever flavor you can think of.
Right, crazy.
So I think exactly. So I think what's bled over in my experience is a lot of the guys from beer came over to bourbon later. So when you come over, you're still wanting that flavor pop, and then I think you see some companies that want to get that flavor pop any way they can. Maybe they're adding something that's not necessarily like this. It's not a finish like this.
Right.
It's a maybe a shortcut.
Right.
And you did not take shortcuts.
Yeah, that's one thing. I'm glad you pointed about shortcuts, and nothing against any producer and the methods that they used. Everybody has their own way of getting the flavor profile they want to get to. One thing I knew going into this, and this is something that James James Simons at Woodwork Collective and I have great
another
discussions
mad
on.
scientist.
Yeah, another mad
scientist.
We do not like staves. Yeah. We do not like spirals, cubes, shortcuts of any kind of method when it comes to wood like that. Nothing against anyone doing that. If that's the profile, that end profile is what you want, and that's the method you need to get to that end profile, more power to you. But for me, I feel like full casks are the only way to really get that balanced wood profile, and that would go for the French oak, Mizunara, Mongolian oak, whatever you want to say. I feel like a full cask gives you that nice ratio of spirit to wood that you can gracefully enter that new kind of depth. Whereas if you shove, staves and spirals and these kind of things in there, you get that extraction. You get that extraction really quickly, as a matter of fact.
But not the maturation.
Right. You don't get that esterification. You don't get those sweeter notes that tend to come out gracefully, like it's a subtle thing. Like with these, I'm not trying to, but I feel like there's a subtle, ease into the finish.
They both drank way under proof.
Right.
So what you have just said is literally the proof in the pudding right there.
Well, what I don't want is it to taste like you're drinking a popsicle stick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are some brands, some big ones, some major brands, that do private selects and stuff using the staves and stuff that have sometimes a popsicle stick kind of taste to them. And I do not want that.
Yeah. Cookie, yeah. What you're doing is a labor of love, right?
Right. Yeah,
it
definitely.
absolutely is, and there are no shortcuts, and we really appreciate that. No. I can't let you out of here without asking you, is there going to be a batch 4 of Raconteur, or like?
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
So we
surprise.
So let me touch on that for a minute, because
please.
After batch 3 came out, so
was it Raconteur?
Yeah, I said Raconteur,
batch 3 Raconteur.
I've not heard of that. What is that?
No, I said, what's next?
I'm teasing. I love it.
So what we did with batch 3, there was a little bit of nerves there, because we went from MGP twice in a row, and a lot of people liked Brazen, which was a bourbon-y type of profile.
It was.
Right.
And then we go to this Bardstown, like 95.5, and Alstrips is Bardstown Bourbon Company. I don't think Dan or anybody there would have a problem with me saying that. It was very different than the first two batches, and there was a little bit of nerves there. Like, I personally loved it. I thought batch 3 was my favorite.
It won in blinds for me.
But I was like, is this going to be too much of a sharp right turn for the people that liked batch 1 and 2? So we went real easy with it and went with just a 500 or so bottle batch, even though we had more that we could do it with, because I was nervous that the reception wouldn't be there because it was way different than the first two. Still had that Raconteur touch, but it was a different kind of beast. Turns out that a lot of folks like batch 3, and I got a lot of emails and DMs like, how can I get more of it? And I'm like, okay, so James and I have decided that we're going to do Ms. Kiss 2. So we're basically going to take the exact same process that we did with the first Ms. Kiss batch 3 and just kind of replicate it for batch 4.
Okay.
It's kind of the talking plan right now.
Nice.
That's kind of what we're looking at doing. I mean,
I like
breaking news.
There you
we've
go.
got plenty of Kentucky we can work with.
What?
We've got Kentucky we can work with. We've got plenty of Indiana we can work with, but repeating batch 3 I think is just a good idea, just because a lot of people missed out, and then the ones that did take the chance and liked it wanted more.
For those that missed out, I do apologize. I bought 18 of them, so you did miss out, so I do apologize.
Thanks for helping me.
Well, thank you. I mean, so what's funny is about batch 3 is that, before we put it into Ms., I let some folks taste the lot samples, and they were just like, this is like, love this. And then when we put it into Ms., it just kind of gave it that. We put it into Ms. that had held Brazen, and that was really just kind of like the point that a lot of people are like, well, you're trying to make it taste like Brazen. That's not what we were trying to do. What we were trying to do is kind of ease into that Mizunara finish, because we didn't want to veer too far from the core profile, because I like the lot samples, just the individual barrel samples right off the bat. Like, I loved them. And James was like, We'll do it kind of easy. We're going to kind of go into the same Ms. barrels that we used for Brazen, and we'll kind of slowly do it and kind of taste it along and make sure that
I did not want to like 3 the best.
You didn't want to.
1 is my favorite.
Yeah.
But then once I had 3 and I blinded it, I mean, 3 is 1 for me.
Yeah.
I like 3. I am 3, 1, 2.
It has this
But my brother,
honey kind of citrus.
2,
Yeah.
batch 2 for my brother.
Yeah.
Because he's not a big rye guy.
Yeah.
And that's more of the bourbon
And
notes.
I could get when Cam tasted it live, he tasted batch 3. I could tell that he was a batch 2 guy, because he was just like, wow, this is really different. I could tell they really are polar opposite.
I was with Cam last weekend.
Oh, were you? Okay.
Yeah, dude.
So 2, I feel like the people that love 2 probably won't like 3 as much.
Yeah, but if you love 1, you're going to love 3.
But if you love 1, you're going to love 3. And I think if you like 3, you might appreciate 2 just because it's different. But 2 is definitely more for the bourbon-y kind of people, and I feel like 3 is definitely a rye. It's just all rye. There's no hiding that. It's just instantly rye from the second you nose it.
Now, in batch 3, were those barrels some of the original barrels that they did?
Those were that first year of production for Bardstown Bourbon Company. That was,
and that's when MGP
some
came
of the
in and
first
taught them how to run 95.5.
That's what I heard. I didn't hear that officially
on their stills.
But I heard.
But I've heard that also from other people besides you, though.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I heard. I heard that again, this is just rumor mill stuff I heard, but when they first put those stills online at Bardstown and they were doing 95.5, Steve Nally had never done a rye before, because he was with Makers, So from what I heard, had some folks come in from MGP to kind of this is how we do our 95.5. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. This is it. What do you call this podcast? This is
facts optional, baby.
Facts optional.
There you go. From the fans,
whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I will say they
facts
did it
optional,
right.
underwear optional. It is what it is, man.
Got to have a parka.
We'll get to that
Parker
later.
optional.
Got to have a parka.
Parka. Yeah, get a parka on there.
But I, if that's true or not, regardless, they did a great job.
Yeah, no, it is.
It is.
It really is.
It's not the first run of rye that they did. I think some of those rare character 95.5 Bardstown ones were the first ones.
Yeah, I've got one.
This
of those
is a
over
few
there.
months down the road.
Lock Key or Lock something. I've got. That's a good one.
Yeah, I
from
think
them.
those were some of the first ones. I think these were the distillation dates on ours were a little bit later, like in the fall. Similar, but not exactly the same, But they just did a fantastic job. And since then, I've tasted 95.5 that Bardstown's making. I've tasted 95.5 that Green River's making, and they're both making phenomenal rye whiskey.
Green River is making 95.5.
Yeah.
Oh, my.
All right, so I will say this: the best release of 2025 that I've tasted so far is Alvez's Evernorth bottle. That's a 6-year Green River.
Okay.
So when I say it's the best thing I've drank in 2025, because we drank.
Is that the one that's like a super short barrel?
Yes.
Okay, I heard good things
But
about
for
that
a 2025 release, that 6-year Green River from Evernorth is the best thing I've tasted that's been released in 2025.
Green River is doing some pretty cool shit.
Some really, So they have a 95.5 also?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I don't know. I can't get too deep into that, but yes, I can say that they are making some 95.5, and it does have some age on it,
Hey,
and it
watch
is really
out.
good.
The NDP police are coming for you.
It's not so much NDP police as much as I don't know how much of that is like
privileged information versus public.
But I do want to say that like they're called Lofted Spirits now. So Lofted Spirits is the umbrella for Bardstown and
I've
Green
heard
River
that.
together.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Lofted.
But Lofted has some really awesome offerings. If you are, an NDP or thinking about starting an NDP, I would probably hit Bardstown up first. Because whereas traditionally a lot of folks would go to MGP, and nothing against MGP, hell, these Caleb Crossings are MGP. MGP makes fantastic whiskey, very consistent.
Yeah.
You can rely on them. I think that if you want Kentucky, Bardstown Bourbon Company is going to be
and unique,
the one to go to. And by Bardstown Bourbon Company, I should correct myself, Lofted Spirits, because between Bardstown and Green River, you can find some really cool barrels.
That's awesome.
So, and there's a lot of recipes that they're not necessarily bottling as their own stuff. There's stuff that they've got that's for wholesale. So
Cane's or Chick-fil-A, David?
I've never had Cane's before. They're not in my area.
So Chick-fil-A, baby.
What?
Here's the thing about Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A to me is like, they're kind of like a one-note pony. It's like you're going to get this one. You're going to get this one chicken flavor no matter what you get. You can get the nuggets. You can get the strips. You can get the grilled.
But it's
you
all
can
good,
get
though.
the fried.
It's good, though.
It's all good.
It's all good.
You're going to get that one chicken flavor. It's
So
not going to be anything.
We're going to have a chicken blind coming up soon on the mashup.
I'm
Just
in.
letting you know.
You want to be part of that? Can you fly in for that?
Yeah, I'll have to do that. One thing that makes me mad, like my local Chick-fil-A, they used to have a chicken salad sandwich, and they don't do that anymore.
A chicken salad sandwich?
Yeah,
Okay,
and like that was kind of like the cool thing to get because it was different. It like had a different profile than the other chicken dishes. And then they've killed that, and I'm like, okay, so we're back to just like chicken. Now, one thing I will praise Chick-fil-A on is they have the best breakfast locally. So like if you want a chicken biscuit or bacon, egg, and cheese, or a breakfast burrito,
I like that burrito.
Yeah, Chick-fil-A is the way
Burrito
to
with
go.
spicy chicken?
Mm-hmm.
Watch out.
Spicy chicken biscuits. Where's that?
It's bad because my son's high school is like a mile down the road from Chick-fil-A, and like most of the time we're barely cutting it to get to his school in time so he's not tardy. But like at the rare chance he's like up early and we're headed that way, he's like, Dad, can we get Chick-fil-A? I'm like, you know it, bud.
That's so great.
Chick-fil-A. Now, he also likes Bojangles. Shout out to Bojangles. And every once in a while, we'll get some Bojangles. That's some greasy
Bojangles
stuff.
some red beans and rice that are good too.
Yeah. Bojangles is the greasy stuff, and I'll say yes to that every once in a while, too.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, David, thank you for being here tonight, man. We really appreciate it. Washington Lafayette.
Thank you.
.com.
Yep, WashingtonLafayette.com.
And Caleb's Crossing Bourbon and Rye.
Exclusively on Bourbon Outfitter.
Exclusively. Can you use code the mashup for that?
You can.
Use code the mashup.
Yeah.
For 5% discount.
to
You sure
buy that.
can.
So this episode launches on April 1st.
Yep.
And these bottles launch on April 4th.
Yep.
You really want to get these.
Yeah,
you really
I agree.
do. Any of our listeners,
Thank you, man.
really want to get these.
Thank
They're
you.
not.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe we shouldn't tell them that though. So we can actually get a chance.
If you don't buy them, we will.
They will sell out. We will guarantee a sell out.
I have a link for a pre-buy, so I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, all
Wink,
right.
wink.
I'm gonna slide into those DMs.
There we go. baby.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. It's been a journey working on this and a lot of nerves, just trying to figure out, is this even going to work, whatever. And to see it kind of like come to fruition and actually be a profile that I'm proud of and collaboration I'm proud of. Now, it's funny because like now that the bar is set, I have to do as good or better. So it's like you get there and it's like when a sports team, they start getting a little bit of like, some wins under the belt and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's like you have to kind of keep that streak going. So
Yep.
I'm proud of these. I feel like to me, I accomplished my goal. I've got to do that again, and that's even more pressure now. Like the first time it was pressure, now it's even more pressure. So
It sounds like you need a local guy to do your tasting for
there you go.
That's what it sounds like to me. I'm local, just letting you know.
Kenny always working an
And he's a
angle.
guy.
There you go.
Boom.
Cheers.
Cheers, y'all. Thank you.
And with that, thanks for listening to this episode. Please like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Mashup KY.
Don't forget to visit our partner, bourbonoutfitter.com. Enter code The Mashup for a special discount.
Also,
Head on over to our partner, the Woodwork Collective, at woodworkcollective.shop. Enter code MASHUP for a 15% discount.
let us know your thoughts on this bottle in the comment section. Until next time, keep it neat.